Oh, I think some of you know Don. He's a longtime Dante member, a former lawyer here in Seattle who's retired and has taken up a second career as a speaker on the Azamara cruise tours of the Mediterranean. I think they only go to the Mediterranean, right, Don?
No, they actually go to a lot of other places.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, he has kindly agreed to speak to us today about some of his many interests, and we look forward to hearing about Southern Italy, one of my favorite places. So,
okay.
There you go, Don.
So should I share my screen now? Should I
Yeah,
go?
That'd be good.
Okay. Now, wait a minute here. I'm okay. Well, shoot. I got this. All right, I'm okay. Well, thank you for the nice introduction. My name's Don Santis. I live in the Seattle area. Actually, I live up in Mill Creek, which is Snohomish County, which is why I've been not too good about attending some of the meetings lately, because when I was working down in the Seattle area, I would just go after work to the meeting. And now for me, it's about a 45-minute drive to head into Seattle, but I do plan on attending more meetings in the future. Tonight's talk I call Southern Italy, Land of Many Cultures, and many cultures because if you look over the last, say, 2,500 years of history of Southern Italy and Sicily, what you find is this amazing cascade of one culture after another culture. In fact, I've read that there have been 17 different countries or nations that have conquered Southern Italy at one point in time. And if you can imagine 17 different rulers, it's almost like a layer cake, right? You got the chocolate layer, the vanilla layer, and all the other flavors. You have one layer after another layer after another layer, and they've all added to this mix that we think of as Southern Italy and Sicily. So that's tonight's talk. This talk is one that I've given on cruise lines before. And see, where do I get to the next slide? Oh. Why am I not moving on the next slide? Oh, here we are. Okay, well, that's just a picture of me on a cruise ship speaking in one of their large auditoriums. And somebody asked something about cruising. I've been on several cruises as a passenger and as a speaker. In fact, I've been on over 20 cruises over the years, so I guess I like cruising. If sometimes people ask me, well, should I take a cruise? Or if I do, what cruise line should I go on? And that one is, the answer to that question is, what do you want out of your trip? What do you want out of your experience? Because the cruise industry has changed dramatically in the last 10 years or so. Some of the lines have gotten bigger and they've built bigger and bigger and bigger ships. There are some cruise ships now that carry 3,000, 4,000, 6,000, 7,000 passengers. And when you add in the crew, that's over 10,000 people. It's like a floating city at sea. Some of the big cruise lines have large venues, auditoriums. They put on Broadway shows. They have ice skating rinks, zip lines, water parks, roller coasters, go-kart tracks, 20 restaurants. I mean, it's like going to a resort. It's like going to Orlando or going to Las Vegas. And if that's what you're looking for, that you should look at one of these larger lines. And they're good for families. I took my grandson on one of those cruises last year, and he loved it. He was 11 years old. For him to go on water slides and do all these other things was fantastic. Now, I typically speak on smaller cruise lines that have smaller ships. And some of these ships have 300 people, 600 people, 700 people. I typically lecture on a ship that's, say, 600 or 700 people. Those smaller ships don't have casinos. They don't have go-kart tracks. They don't have Broadway shows. They don't have anything. They have staterooms. They have a pool, a spa, a couple of hot tubs. But the point on the smaller cruise lines is that you're going not for the experience on the ship, you're going for the ports that you're going to visit. So for example, I'm going to be doing 3 cruises in June on Azamara Cruise Lines. And one of them starts outside of Venice, but it goes to smaller towns. So it goes to Ravenna, Ancona, Amalfi, Sorrento, the island of Elba. And there the emphasis is the experience of the places you visit, not all the stuff you can do on the ship. Okay, so that really depends on what you want. So there's a little bit on the cruise industry these days. This one happened to be on Norwegian Cruises, which was a large ship. I was in an auditorium here. My audience was about 500 people or so in the auditorium. So I have done some speaking before large groups, but I must admit, this is my very first Zoom meeting. So kind of excited. Now, you might have guessed from my last name that Santis is Italian. My father's parents were from Abruzzo. And here I am with my wife and my son back in 2005. And we were in Abruzzo, and you see these 2 street signs here. It says Abitaggio to the left, 2 kilometers, and Rocco Morici to the right. And that's just like less than a kilometer. My grandmother came from the town to the right. My grandfather came from the town to the left. 2 very small towns, probably 1,000 people or so at most, less than 1,000 people. And this was in eastern Abruzzo near a town called Chieti. Now, I know that the Dante Society had a speaker on Abruzzo back in October. I would have loved to come. I was in Europe again doing some cruises, so I sorry I missed that. But so I've been back to Italy several times, but I've been back to Abruzzo only the one time. So, all right, well, let's see here, advancing this again. Oh, no. Okay, well, I like to point out to people that Italy is a very young nation. If we go around Europe, Italy is one of the newest countries in Europe, really. And I jokingly tell people in some of my talks that, the city of Seattle is older than Italy. I mean, the state of Oregon is older than Italy. Now, some of you are probably hearing that thinking, what's this guy talking about here? It sounds a little crazy to me. But the city of Seattle was founded in 1854. The nation of Italy was not founded until 1861. Really, from the end of the Western Roman Empire in the 400s, all the way to 1861, except for just a couple of years, the Italian peninsula was never united. People didn't see themselves as Italians, really. They saw themselves as Neapolitan or Venetian or Abruzzese or Piemontese or something like that, but they didn't think of themselves as Italian because there was no country called Italy. In fact, in the early 1800s, in Austria, the great Austrian Chancellor Kurt von Metternich said, Italy's not a country, it's a geographic region. But I take this quote from this Italian politician noted here, Massimo di Azeglio, who said, we made Italy, now we must make Italians, because people didn't think, they didn't have this concept of being an Italian. Now, this quote on the right, I just threw in for the fun of it. I think it's kind of humorous. Giovanni Giolitti was prime minister of Italy 4 times between the 1880s and the 1920s. And he said, governing Italy is not impossible, it's pointless. Okay, well, let's move on here. If we think about the languages spoken in Italy, one thing we know that there's a tremendous amount of diversity in Italy. As you go from one end of the peninsula to another, people speak different languages, different dialects. Now, what's the difference between a dialect and a language? Well, that's a little hard to say. There's an old joke that a language is a dialect that has an army and a navy. But as we go around Italy, we see a lot of different dialects and spoken, many of them mutually unintelligible. People can't understand each other. Now, here's some languages spoken in Italy. And these are, on the left, are recognized minorities. These are officially recognized minorities in Italy. And we see here lots of different nationalities, lots of different cultures, lots of different languages. On the right, those three are not recognized minorities per se, but they all have their own regional languages. Most Italian dialects are based out of Latin, or as you saw on my last screen, what was called vulgar Latin. Vulgar Latin was just simply the Latin spoken by the common person, not the aristocrats, not the philosophers, not the writers, and so forth. But there's a number of different dialects spoken throughout Italy. An interesting study was done back in 1975 that said 3/4 of all Italians spoke Italian during the day when they went to work, but when they got home, they spoke something else. They spoke their regional dialect. Now, that percentage, I'm sure, is much different in the last 40 or 50 years. It's changed dramatically. Why has it changed? Well, the media, movies, and television, all that, but the internet. The young people in Italy are not learning the regional dialects. For example, on the island of Sardinia, they speak a language, or used to speak a language called Sardu. Now only 10 or 20% of the people on the island actively speak it or can understand it in a fluent manner. And those people are mostly in their 60s and 70s and 80s. Younger people are tending towards strictly Italian. Now, let's move on to our topic here of Southern Italy. These are the regions of Southern Italy, what's known as the Mezzogiorno. Okay, Abruzzo, Puglia, Basilicata, Calabria, Campania, Molise, and Sicily. Now, they're colored brown on this map. Notice that Sardinia is colored brown. Usually, Sardinia is not considered part of Southern Italy, but these other areas are. Now, if we look at Abruzzo in the north, that's as far north as Rome. It's not really in the south of Italy, but culturally, it's part of Southern Italy. So, here's a map of the Mediterranean today. When we look at the Mediterranean, we tend to think of it as a dividing line. To the north, well, that's Europe, that's Western civilization, more Christian population. To the south, it's more of an Arabic society. Islam is the main religion, but that's not the way it was in the ancient world. In the ancient world, the Mediterranean didn't divide the north from the south. It united the north from the south. So here is a picture called Magna Graecia, Greater Greece. Magna Graecia is Latin. It's something the Romans called, because in ancient Greece, Greece is a small country. It's very mountainous, not a lot of good agricultural land. So it couldn't support a large population. So what happened? Greeks left Greece and they moved to other parts of the Mediterranean. And so Western Turkey, Greece, but particularly Southern Italy and Sicily were heavily Greek. This was really, the Romans considered it Greece. And in fact, when the Romans conquered Southern Italy, there were people still speaking Greek well into the 3rd century AD. Okay. Now, let me back up here for a moment. Let's say you love Greek buildings, you love Greek temples, you love Greek architecture. You want to go visit, where are the best Greek temples? Well, there's not a obvious answer. Where would you go for Greek temples? You'd go to Southern Italy. Here in Agrigento on the island of Sicily is called the Valley of the Temples, and there's a series of temples there. Okay, if we look at the next one, this is the temple of, sorry, I'm getting used to this whole Zoom thing. The temple of Hera in Segesta in Sicily. This is in the western part of the island near Trapani. Some of these pictures I took, I happened to take this one myself. This is the Greek theater in the city of Taormina on the island of Sicily. There's several Greek theaters throughout Sicily. In Paestum, which is sort of northeast, if you will, of the town of Salerno in southern Italy, you're going to find 3 large Greek temples. And in fact, there's more existing Greek temples in the south of Italy and Sicily than you're going to find in the country of Greece today. Okay. Here's another picture that shows that the Greeks settled throughout the northern part of the Mediterranean, but the southern part of the Mediterranean was settled by a group of people called the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians weren't colonists like the Greek. They didn't export a large population. They're just more interested as being business people, buying and selling things. And so they didn't establish large colonies, but they established a number of trading cities. and trading points, the largest being Carthage in North Africa. But you notice here on Sicily, they settled the western part of Sicily, and the Greeks the eastern part of Sicily. Here's just another map. Okay, here's a detailed map of Magna Graecia, southern Italy. Every one of these towns is a Greek town. Okay, and Neapolis in Greek just means new city, but that's the city of Naples today. Naples was founded as a Greek colony about 500 or 600 BC, and it was called Neapolis. Now, Syracuse, look at our second point there. Syracuse was one of the largest Greek cities in the world. And in fact, it was one of the most powerful Greek cities in the world. In the year 409 BC, Athens invaded Syracuse. Now, we all have heard of Athens, you know, the golden age of Athens. Athens was the most powerful city-state in all of Greece. And it was, and guess what? They were defeated by Syracuse. So the most powerful city in mainland Greece was defeated by a Greek city-state located in Sicily. And that's Syracuse. Now, in the south of the Italian peninsula there, in Calabria, there were a number of important Greeks who had settled there. You might remember from your high school geometry class, or maybe you don't want to remember your high school geometry class, but Pythagoras, with the Pythagorean theorem, Pythagoras moved from his birthplace to live in southern Calabria. Herodotus, known as the father of history, moved from Greece to live in Sicily. So southern Sicily was a highly concentrated Greek area. Now, about 250 BC, things start to change because there's a new kid on the block. And that new kid on the block is Rome. Rome is expanding southward. And one by one, it picks off all the cities, Greek city-states of southern Italy, and eventually runs into Carthage, which was this Phoenician city, which I spoke about a little earlier. And the Romans fought 3 wars against the Carthaginians. They were called the Punic Wars. In the end, they destroyed Carthage. They later rebuilt it. And they turned and they took over all the Carthaginian territories in Spain and in North Africa. Now, oops. Okay. Southern Italy and Sicily now became part of the Roman world. And for 700 years, southern Italy and Sicily were part of the Roman world. And they're a very important part of the Roman world. Now, this is the Roman Empire in 117 AD or CE, sometimes you see now. And we can see here that the Romans called the Mediterranean, they didn't call it the Mediterranean. They simply called it Mare Nostrum, which is Latin for RC. Essentially, we own the Mediterranean, right? It's ours. And so that's why they call it Mare Nostrum. Now, again, sorry here. Southern Italy and Sicily were a very integral part of the Roman world. Rome was a large city. In 200 BC, there were about 200,000 people in Rome. By the year 25 BC, the first emperor Augustus, Rome had grown to 1 million people. In fact, Rome may even have gotten larger than that. It could have been somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million people. And keep in mind that no city in Europe ever reached that population again until London in the 1850s. But Rome was vast. But when you had such a large population, how do you feed it? Well, that's where Sicily became an important prize to the Romans, because what the Romans did is Sicily became the breadbasket of Rome. Transports continually sailing from Sicily to Rome to feed the city. The city would not have been able to exist without Sicily. Many wealthy Romans had country homes or villas. If you're a senator or an aristocrat, you would have a country home somewhere in Campania, generally around the Bay of Naples. Maybe you'd have a country villa down on the island of Sicily. And as some wealthy people today might say, have a place in Florida, or they might go to Aspen in Colorado or Vail or something like that. Wealthy Romans went to Naples or Sicily, and that's where they established their villas. Now, the Romans liked mosaic art. They did mosaics on their walls, but they really like mosaics on their floors. Now, there's a place called the Villa Romana del Casale, which is in Piazza Armerina on the island of Sicily. Some of you may have been there before. I see you shaking your head there. Joyce shaking her head. There's 3,500 mosaics there. And the site gets about 350,000 visitors a year, but they have the best Roman mosaics in the world at the Villa Romana. So here's hunters, here's dancers, just an incredible collection of mosaics there. Now, Rome dominated southern Italy and Sicily for 700 years, right? And the Roman Empire grew, had a population over 70 million. But things began to change in around the 300s and 400s AD. The Emperor Constantine, who's sometimes called the first Christian emperor, built a new capital city, which he named after himself, Constantinople, and moved the capital to there. Rome's no longer the capital of the empire. The empire was then divided between East and West, and eventually it collapsed under the pressure of various foreign invasions, we call them. They're referred to as the barbarian invasions, but a number of Germanic tribes. So here's a division of the empire in 395 between Eastern and Roman. Now, it's the Roman Empire that collapsed in 476, not the Eastern Empire. The Eastern Empire did not collapse. In history, the Eastern Empire is often referred to by the name the Byzantine Empire. So you're maybe familiar with that term, the Byzantine Empire. Here's the fall of Rome in the 5th century, and we see all these various Germanic tribes invade the empire, which eventually created a situation where the West could not survive. And in 476, the last emperor in the West was deposed by a German warlord who established himself as king. Now, he didn't last very long because he was overthrown by another person called Theodoric, who was the leader of the Ostrogoths. So from 476 on, Italy is not part of the Roman Empire anymore. It's part of this Germanic kingdom. And Theodoric is the guy you pay your taxes to. The Germans are now the rulers of Italy, and therefore the rulers of southern Italy and Sicily as well. Theodoric was a very well-educated guy. He'd grown up as a young man in the eastern capital of Constantinople. And I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially he said something once about, it's the goal of every German to be a Roman, but no self-respecting Roman would ever want to be a German. Anyhow, so Italy now is the Germanic kingdom. So if we think about this over about a 1,000-year period, there were Carthaginians, there were Greeks, there were Romans, and now there's Goths. But this Gothic rule over southern Italy doesn't last very long. Here's a picture of the Gothic kingdom of Italy. It doesn't last very long because these people, the Emperor Justinian, he's an emperor in the East, in Constantinople. And he's a big dreamer. He wants to put the Roman Empire back together again. He's going to invade the West and recreate the Roman Empire. Now, here is his capital city. This is the capital city of Constantinople, which was the capital of the East, now known as Istanbul in Turkey. But through various invasions, Justinian is able to recapture part of the former Roman Empire, which includes Italy, of course, and southern Italy and Sicily. Now, this reconquest actually was not a good thing. It was a very bad thing for Italy. Why? Because it took the Eastern Romans 20 years of constant warfare to defeat the Goths, to defeat the Germans. And when the war is finally over and the Goths surrender, Italy is in ruins. The infrastructure is destroyed. The population of Rome falls from 300,000 or 400,000 to maybe 50,000 people. Survivors living in the ruins. It's all it was. And no sooner does this victory happen than another Germanic tribe called the Lombards invades. And they shatter the peace and they overrun much of Italy. Now, here obviously is Italy. This light yellow area was parts that were retained by the Byzantines, or these Eastern Romans. But the brown area was the area conquered by the Lombards. And one of the most important Lombard kingdoms was in the south, and that was called the Duchy of Benevento. And so the Lombards established themselves in the far north, but they also established them in the south. So now we have southern Italy ruled by what? these Eastern Roman Byzantines and the Lombards. Now, the Eastern Empire begins to change and it morphs. About the year 600, they drop the use of Latin. It's just Greek. And progressively, the Eastern Empire is becoming more and more and more Greek. So again, Southern Italy is finding itself as being ruled by these Greek rulers from the East. And it's not just Greek rulers, it's the Greek language. Plus, within Christianity at the time, there's a split that's developing between the Western Church and the Eastern Church. The Western Church is headquartered in Rome, the Bishop of Rome, we call the Pope. The Eastern Church is headquartered in Constantinople, and the bishop there was called the Patriarch. But increasingly, there's a divide between these. Southern Italy, since it was occupied in part by the Byzantines, Southern Italy becomes very much an Orthodox region. So not Roman Catholic, more Orthodox in outlook. Here's a church near the town of area of Reggio in Calabria. It's called in a town called Stilo, S-T-I-L-O. Now, if we look at this church a moment, does this look like your typical church you would see in Western Europe? No, it's not. This is an Eastern style. This is an Orthodox style church. And what you're going to find is you're going to find a lot of churches in Southern Italy that have this Orthodox style to them. And inside, all the artwork is Orthodox as well. What's interesting is archaeologists found that written on one of the walls was Arabic script because the Arabs invaded Southern Italy. And so at one point in time, this church might have been converted to a mosque. We're not sure. Today, it's a Catholic church. It's sort of a national monument. But the point I'm trying to make here is that much of Southern Italy in the 700s, the 800s, the 900s had this Greek orientation because it was part of the Byzantine Empire. Now, something was happening here in the Mediterranean world in around the year 600 and 700. Here's the Eastern Empire. They're in purple. In orange there is the Persian Empire. For hundreds of years, the Romans and the Persians fought each other. But around the year 600, there's a businessman in the Arabian Peninsula. He says he's visited by the Archangel Gabriel, who tells him, this is how people should live their lives. This is God's will. Okay. That person was the Prophet Muhammad. At his death in 632, his followers, filled with ambition to spread his new message and also interested in conquest, leave the Arabian Peninsula and they invade the Roman and the Persian empires. So if we look at this, in 632, Muhammad dies. In 634, Jerusalem falls to the Arabs. In 635, Damascus falls. In 644, Alexandria, Egypt, the second biggest city in the empire, falls. And in 641, the Arabs destroy the Persian Empire. And now what we have is we have a new world dominated by Islam. The Arabs move west. They conquered the Roman province of North Africa that Justinian had reconquered. They destroy the city of Carthage. They move further west. They invade Spain. They conquer all of Spain in the early 700s. So it was only a matter of time before what? They turned their sights onto Southern Italy. And that's what happens. The Arabs first invaded Sicily several times in the 7th century, unsuccessfully, but they really make an effort in the year 827 under the Emirate of Ifriqiya, which is what it was called in North Africa. Palermo falls to the Arabs in 831, Malta in 870. Syracuse is captured in 878, and most of the population is killed or sold off into slavery. Taormina falls in 902. The Arabs raid Calabria, they capture Reggio. What happens is that the Arabs basically overrun the entire island of Sicily, and they overrun part of southern Italy as well. And so it looks like southern Italy and Sicily may be slipping out of the grasp of the Byzantines and becoming part of the Arab world. much of the population starts to convert to Islam. In fact, by about the 11th century, probably a majority of the people living in Sicily are Muslims. Okay, they're not Muslims from North Africa, they're local population that's converted to Islam. Now, this is just a map of the various invasions of the Arabs over a century or two, in the year in which many of these cities were captured and fell to the Arabs, fell to Arab rule. Okay, this again is just map here is showing that the southern Italy and Sicily were a key point of confrontation and battle between European civilization and Arabic civilization. This is Italy in the year 1000. Okay, we see Sicily as part of the emirate. It becomes independent of North Africa, but it's still a Muslim country. It's the emirate of Sicily. The Byzantines now only hold just a very small amount of southern Italy, the tips and the toe, and that's basically it. These other places like the Principality of Benevento and the Principality of Salerno, they're held by the Lombards, that Germanic tribe that I mentioned earlier before. So let's stop and think here for a moment. So southern Italy has been occupied by the Carthaginians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Goths, the Byzantines, the Lombards, and now the Arabs. Okay, you can just start adding them all up, and you can see all these various cultures and groups that have conquered or have attempted to conquer southern Italy. Now, the Byzantines were so desperate that they were losing their grasp on southern Italy that they said, we need help. What are we going to do? We're going to go out and find the biggest, baddest mercenaries available and hire them. And who are the biggest, baddest mercenaries available? It was a people we call the Normans. And who are the Normans? They're the descendants of Norwegian Vikings who settled in northern France. The French called them the men from the north, or the Normands. And so they got the name Norman. Okay, and there's an area still in France today called Normandy. And anyhow, the Normans were fierce fighters, and they were hired by the Byzantines, and they came to southern Italy originally to fight the Lombards. Well, they did that, but then the Lombards offered the Normans more money than the Byzantines were paying them. So then they flipped sides and fought for the Lombards against the Byzantines. And eventually the Normans completely expelled the Byzantines out of Italy in 1071. The city of Bari was the last city in southern Italy to be controlled by the Byzantines. And then the Normans turned their sights on the island of Sicily, and they invade Sicily in the late 11th century. But what they do, though, is they do something pretty amazing. They conquer Sicily, the Normans do. They conquer southern Italy, but instead of expelling the population or forcing people to convert or forcing them to change their language, they didn't do any of that. What they say is, we're going to allow people to keep their own religion. We're going to allow them to speak their own language. We're going to allow them to live their own lives as they lived them before. In other words, freedom of religion, freedom of language, as long as they're loyal to the Norman state. And about a third of the population of Sicily and southern Italy speaks Greek. And Muslims and Greeks fill many positions within the government, and a majority of the population of Sicily is actually Muslim at this time. This is the kingdom of Sicily. This is the Norman kingdom. The Normans established this kingdom throughout southern Italy and Sicily, but they create this diverse state that's made up of all these various peoples, various religions, various languages, and they decide to tolerate them all. And so what we see, if you travel around southern Italy or Sicily, you'll find in churches all this artwork and all these images which are not Western-based, they're Eastern-based. They're Orthodox in nature. In the cathedral, Cephalou Cathedral outside of Palermo, here we see this giant image of Jesus. This type of image in Greek was called a pantocrator, or it means the creator of the world. You'll see this in every Orthodox church, right? They all have this image of Jesus as the creator of the world. But you're also going to find the same image throughout churches in southern Italy and in Sicily. Here was a cathedral that was built in Palermo And it was the royal cathedral. It served the king, the Norman king. And what's amazing about this is the style of the building is a Western Latin style building. However, all the artwork inside is Byzantine. But if you look at the arches here over this altar, these arches are Arabic style arches. And there's Arabic script all over the walls, but yet the doors are carved in a Norman style. And so we have this cathedral that's really Norman, Arabic, Byzantine, all rolled into one, okay, all within this one building. Now, around the year 1100, a new king comes to power. He's called Roger II. He's a Norman king. And Roger did something pretty amazing. He doesn't do what I just did and flip through two screens, but he gathers Latin scholars, he gathers Greek scholars, he gathers Jewish scholars, he gathers Muslim scholars, and he sets them all up at his court. And he wants them to discuss, he wants them to debate, he wants to learn from them, he wants to ask them questions. And you would think that this Norman kingdom would be a pretty rough and tumble place given the military reputation of the Normans. But in fact, you can make a pretty fair argument that southern Italy and Sicily was the intellectual capital of Europe in the 11th and early 12th century. Nowhere else in Europe was this going on. I mean, this is really the intellectual capital of Europe. Here are some portrayals of Roger. Now remember, he's a Norman, but on the left, see, here's a picture. He's being crowned by Jesus, right? But he's painted, he's portrayed as a Byzantine emperor. But look on the right, he's kneeling on a carpet. Is that the way you would expect a Viking to look? No, he looks like an Arabic ruler there, kneeling on this carpet. So he's portraying himself in different ways to his various constituents within his kingdom. Here's the kingdom of the Norman kingdom under Roger II. Roger then invades North Africa, and he conquers part of North Africa. And for about 50 years, southern Italy, Sicily, and North Africa were part of one kingdom. Now, eventually the Normans, after Roger dies, his successors give up North Africa, but he was trying to create this sort of Mediterranean state, this multi-ethnic, very diverse state. What's the legacy of the Norman kingdom? Well, new agricultural methods are introduced to Sicily. It becomes a center of learning throughout Europe. Greek and Arabic science and arts flourish. Like I said, it's really the leading region in all of Europe in many ways. Okay, I'm missing a slide here. I'll just tell you about it. So, while Roger is king, he has this one Arabic scholar who's at his court, and the scholar puts together a map of the world. And he takes 70 pieces and he sort of stitches them together, and he recreates 70% of the Northern Hemisphere. Now, not the Southern Hemisphere, because people didn't really understand what the Southern Hemisphere looked like, but he creates a pretty accurate looking map. And the other thing that's really amazing, and this is about the year 1100, right? When I was a kid in school, I was told people thought that the world was flat until Columbus came along and sailed west. Well, that's not true. A lot of people in Europe and other areas knew that the world was round, that it wasn't flat. Anyhow, this Arabic scholar does some mathematical equations and tells Roger that the circumference of the earth is 22,500 miles. Well, what is the circumference of the world? It's about 24,000 miles. He's within 10% accuracy. And this is in the year 1100. So that just tells you something more about what was going on in the south of Italy. Now, unfortunately, though, one of Roger's heirs doesn't have any male children. Excuse me. And without a male child, there can be no successor. And so through marriage, the successors of the Normans are Germans. The House of Hohenstaufen becomes the new rulers of southern Italy for about 75 years. And then for a couple hundred years, southern Italy is ruled by the French. And then for about 400 years after that, southern Italy is ruled by the Spanish. So it's this revolving door of various cultures, various rulers that go on and on and on. Now, here I said the Hohenstaufens were a German family. They ruled southern Italy for about 75 years. One of the rulers during that period of time was Frederick II. Again, he continues the Norman legacy of learning. Excuse me. He spoke 6 languages. Okay, he was the king of southern Italy. He spoke 6 languages. He was a scientist, a scholar, an architect, a poet. He was also excommunicated by the Pope 3 times. Yeah, he and the Pope didn't get along too well. He was referred to as the Stupor Mundi, which is the amazement of the world. That's what his contemporaries called him. Now, Pope Innocent IV, remember I said he didn't get along with papacy. Innocent IV called him the Antichrist, and he's actually found on the 6th level of hell in Dante's Inferno. But he was an amazing ruler in the 1200s. Now, what happens is that there's the Hohenstaufens, as I said, get into a dispute with the Pope, and they lose control of Naples to a French aristocrat called Charles of Anjou. Charles then invades southern Italy and pushes the Hohenstaufens out of southern Italy, and southern Italy now becomes a French-ruled kingdom. They're not part of France, but they're ruled by a French aristocratic family, the House of Anjou. But in 1282, there's a rebellion in Sicily against the French. And in order to fight the rebellion, the Sicilians seek the aid of someone called Peter, King of Aragon. Well, Aragon is a Spanish kingdom, but at the time, Aragon was independent. So the Spaniards come in and they help the Sicilians in their war against the French. And finally, in 1302, there's a peace that's signed, and the House of Anjou keeps southern Italy. The Kingdom of Aragon, which is Spain, a Spanish kingdom, takes control of Sicily. The really weird thing here, though, is that Sicily becomes known as the Kingdom of Sicily. However, the House of Anjou, which rules southern Italy, refuses to really acknowledge that, and they call it the Kingdom of Sicily. So if you could say, I'm going to the Kingdom of Sicily, a good question would be, which one? Because there were 2. Confusing, I know. But for several hundred years, 2 different countries called themselves the Kingdom of Sicily, southern Italy and the actual island of Sicily. Now, in 1442, the Spaniards finally push the French out of southern Italy, and they take over southern Italy. But they keep it as a separate kingdom, but it's ruled by Spain. So now look what we've done. To that whole list of people I've had, we've added, after the Hohenstaufens, the Germans, we've added the French for 200 years, and now we've brought in the Spanish. So now southern Italy is ruled by the Spanish. Now, some amazing castles here. This is Castle Nuovo in Naples. You've maybe seen this castle before. It was built by Charles I, who was the House of Anjou, and it was the royal seat of the kings of Naples and Aragon in Spain until 1815. So this was the royal seat of power in southern Italy for about 500 years. Oops. Okay. I'm going to pick up the speed here a little bit because I see we've got about 15 minutes left. But what we have is we have a succession of Spanish aristocrats who rule southern Italy. And in the 1400s, southern Italy, let's call it the Kingdom of Naples, but officially it was called the Kingdom of Sicily. The Kingdom of Naples was the most powerful state in Italy, and Naples was the largest and the most important city in Italy. Now, I know we think of the 1400s, we think of Florence, we think of Siena, we think of Milan in the north, but Naples was the most powerful and the largest city in Italy. This map is not very clear, but this whole area here was controlled by the Kingdom of Aragon, which later became part of the Kingdom of Spain. So we can see here, Sardinia, Corsica, Sicily, and all of southern Italy are essentially ruled by the Spaniards. Okay. Here again, Kingdom of Naples, Kingdom of Sicily. Both of these are Spanish kingdoms. In 1498, Charles VIII of France invades Italy because he tries to press the claim, that southern Italy belongs to France because of the House of Anjou. However, the French are defeated decisively by a Spanish army, and they leave Italy never basically to return. And so from 1504 on, southern Italy is cemented definitely as part of Spain. And it becomes culturally part of Spain as well. Now, it doesn't mean that the thousands of Spaniards came to Italy and lived. No, in fact, they didn't. What happened is the Spaniards left the local southern aristocrats in control, and then they just reported to the Spanish king's deputy who lived in Naples. So the Spanish controlled at the top. They didn't really export people to Italy, but they controlled the government. And they controlled the government all the way down to 1861. Okay, Naples is the largest and most popular region of Spain outside of Castile. There were 3 million people in 1600. There was a war between France and Spain from 1631 to 1636. Guess who provided most of the troops in the Franco-Spanish War? Naples. Naples contributed 53,000 soldiers and 3.5 million ducats, more than twice the amount contributed by Castile, which is the major region in Spain. Okay. Then we get to 1700. There's something called the War of Spanish Succession. I'm not going to go into that. It was a battle between the Holy Roman Empire and France. But the bottom line here is that Spain maintains their control of southern Italy. Okay. From 1806 on, the Spanish aristocrats rule both Naples and Sicily, and they merge the two. So instead of keeping them as separate kingdoms, they merge the two. And what do they call them? The Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Okay, just to add more confusion to the whole thing. We had these two kingdoms called the Kingdom of Sicily here, the Kingdom of Sicily there, and now the United Kingdom is the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Just to confuse us later tourists who come to the region. Okay. So the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. All right. These Spanish kings who rule in the south build 4 great palaces in southern Italy. One of them here was the royal palace in Caserta. And I think, Dan, you mentioned something about Caserta, about your family was from that region. Okay, this palace had like 2,600 rooms in it. It had over 1,000 fireplaces, and it had its own theater where they could put on opera and plays for the king. Okay, so that the king wouldn't have to travel to a theater. He could have the plays brought right to him. And this was the largest palace built in Europe in the 1700s. Massive. It's massive. Let's look at some other pictures here. This is the backyard. Okay, I mean, you'd die for a backyard like that, right? This is the backyard at the Regia di Caserta, or the Royal Palace. And this is just, just outside of Naples. Now, in southern Italy in the 1600s, there was a series of earthquakes in the late 1600s, like 1693 or so, a series of earthquakes that destroyed a lot of buildings in southern Italy. So as buildings were being rebuilt, they were rebuilt in a certain style. And the style that was popular at the time in Italy was called Baroque. And so you'll find throughout southern Italy, lots and lots of Baroque style structures. So let's look at some here. These are 2 churches. One is, sorry, I've got a bar blocking my view here. The Church of San Giorgio and Ragusa, that's on the left. The church, the cathedral in Noto, which is on Sicily, and that's on the right. This is the Baroque style. These were built, as I said, because of the significant destruction from a series of earthquakes that occurred over a period of years. And so you will find this throughout southern Italy, this Baroque style buildings. Oh, sorry, I got things out of order here. We're back to the royal palace in Caserta again. This is one of the stairways. This is one of the meeting rooms. Okay, you can see it's an incredible palace. I mean, the first thing I think of when I look at it is Versailles, but it's, it equals Versailles. Now, we get to the 1800s, and there's a movement now in Italy to unify the country, and that's called the Risorgimento. And in the north, it comes from the north. And Garibaldi, who was a revolutionary, Garibaldi was involved in the overthrow of the Papal States in 1848, which was then later recaptured by the Pope. But Garibaldi was a revolutionary. He convinces the king in the north, the King of Savoy, King Vittorio Emanuele, and his prime minister, Camillo Cavour, to support him in trying to unify the country. Well, they're a little nervous about this. They're not sure how it's going to go. So what they do is they give him some ships. They give Garibaldi some ships, and they give him some rifles, old, out-of-date rifles. And he sails to Sicily with 1,000 men. Now, I think that they did it in this way because if Garibaldi failed, they could claim they didn't know anything about it. Governments call that. It's called plausible deniability. Right? Well, we didn't know what he was doing, right? What was he up to? What happens, though, is Garibaldi lands in Sicily with 1,000 men. He faces off against 24,000 men in the army of the Kingdom of Naples/Sicily, and he defeats them. What's really interesting about this concept, I talked about Italy being a young nation and people not thinking of themselves as being Italian. As his men march through Sicily, they chant and sing, and they chant, Viva l'Italia, Viva l'Italia. The Sicilian peasants don't know what Italia is. They don't know, they don't have this concept of Italy. And word soon spreads that l'Italia was the name of King Victor Emmanuel's wife. She's the queen of the Kingdom of Savoy. They don't know that l'Italia is the country of Italy, or the soon-to-be country of Italy. Again, differences. Here's just some more pictures of Garibaldi, the revolutionary, very dashing photos. Now, southern Italy after unification, after the Risorgimento, what happens is that southern Italy just doesn't compare in terms of industrialization. For example, there was like a few thousand miles of train track in northern Italy in the 1860s. There was 140 miles of train track in southern Italy. Industrial production like steel in the north is 10 times what it is in the south. The south was not industrialized at all. It was an agricultural area. The north was industrializing rapidly. And so the wealth between the two regions the differences were dramatic. 90% of the towns of the south were not connected by roads. Okay. How are they connected? How did you get from town A to town B? Trails and goat paths. That's what connected the towns of southern Italy, not roads. Okay, I talk here about kilometers. Actually, it was much more than that, kilometers of railroads. That's 75,000. Sorry, that's a little bit of a misprint there. The north had 17,000 tons of iron and steel production. The south had 1,500 tons. That's 10 times the amount. The first census done in southern Italy showed that 20% of the population lived in what were called subterranean spaces. What does that mean? Caves. 20% of the population of southern Italy lived in caves. They were so poor. The literacy rate in the South was about 13%. Why? I mean, why was the South so much at a disadvantage compared to the North? Well, let's think back about these 17 different conquerors, the Carthaginians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Ostrogoths, the Byzantines, I can't even remember them all, the Lombards, the Arabs, the Normans, the Germans, the French, the Spanish. All these various conquerors came and they took from southern Italy, but they didn't reinvest in southern Italy. They kept, in a way, southern Italy was kept almost poor, okay? And anyhow, the first governor of Naples after Italy was united wrote a letter to the king in the north and said, there's 7 million people who live in southern Italy. I can't find 100 that want to be our friends and united with us. Okay. During the 1860s, 2/3 of the Italian army was stationed in southern Italy just to maintain the peace. Okay. I mentioned this movie here. It's based on a book. Il Gattopardo is a story of a Southern aristocrat whose life is changed by the Risorgimento. It was made into a movie in the 1960s. It was actually it's an Italian movie starring Burt Lancaster. It's kind of funny that the producers said, we want Burt Lancaster. The director was Luchino Visconti, and he goes, Burt Lancaster, you mean the cowboy? And they were, yes, because they wanted to appeal to the American market. And so they thought if they had Burt Lancaster in the movie. Now, there's an Italian version and an English version of the movie. I've seen both. The Italian version is much better. Okay, it's much better. When it was brought to the United States and dubbed into English, they cut out like 30 minutes of the movie to make it shorter. So if you ever see this movie, you can rent it. The Italian version is much better. Near the end of his life, in an interview with a film critic, Burt Lancaster said it was one of the favorite movies he's ever made. Okay, and he had quite a career in the film industry. Okay, because of this poverty in the South, and because the North when the North came down, not only did they occupy the South, they imposed taxes to help pay for the war. And this caused rebellions throughout the South. And so you had these roving bands of people throughout southern Italy that were called the Briganti, basically like brigands. That's what they were considered. And that's why 2/3 of the Italian army was stationed in the South, trying to suppress these various local rebellions that occurred within southern Italy. Coming to America. Between 1880 and 1924, about 4.3 million Italians left Italy. Half that number came just between 1900 and actually that should say 1910. That's a little misprint there. 1900 1910. 2 million of those people came in that year. 80% of all the immigrants who came to this country are from southern Italy, not the north. That's why, my family's from Abruzzo. Many of you, your families are probably from southern Italy. My grandfather left Naples in 1903 on a ship to New York. My grandmother left a couple years ago, same thing. She sailed from a ship from Naples to New York. Most of the immigrants came to large cities on the East Coast. As of 2019, it's estimated there's 5.1% of the US population, or about 16.7 million people, are of Italian descent. And the most Italian state in the nation is New Jersey. Okay, of the top 15 cities in the US with Italians, percentage-wise, not number-wise, percentage-wise, New Jersey has numbers 1, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, and 13. Okay, so East Coast. When I went to Abruzzo in 2005, I went to the village where my mother was from, and they put up this statue there years and years and years ago, very poignant statue, almost a little bit of a sad statue, because you see this guy, and he's holding a suitcase, and there's a little kid hanging onto his leg, as if he's saying, don't go, don't go, okay? And then it says in Italian, essentially, to our brother immigrants who always in their heart have the love of their country. And this is because of the huge drain of Southern Italians who moved to the United States. Because of this history of Southern Italy, where it's one foreign conqueror after another foreign conqueror after another foreign conqueror, Southern Italians didn't develop a national consciousness like you found in some other countries in Europe. Throughout the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s, within France, within Spain, within England, and various other European countries, there's the creation of what you call the modern nation state. People began to think of themselves as French. People around Spain started thinking of themselves as Spanish and not as Aragonese or Castilian or something else. England and Scotland meld, and they're not just England or Scotland, they're now British. So there's this sense of nation building that's going on around most of Europe that doesn't occur in Southern Italy. People think of themselves locally and not nationally. So who do they trust? Who do they identify with? They identify with their families, they identify with their village, they identify with their clans. They don't particularly identify with this concept, at least initially, of Italy. Now, I've got one humorous little picture here. I think the next one is it. Pizza, okay. Margherita pizza, my favorite kind of pizza. I can't stand stuff that has pineapple and Canadian bacon and all of the stuff on it. That's totally inauthentic. Margherita pizza. In June of 1889, Raffaele Esposito, a chef in Naples, created this dish specifically for the Queen. And her name was Queen Margherita of Italy. And so that's where we get the name Margherita pizza. And so with that delicious note, I think I'll conclude my talk. I know I went a little fast at times, and sorry with my going back and forth with the slides. This is the first time I've done a Zoom meeting with this, but I guess if we have some questions, I'm ready to try and take them on now. So do I just go through these questions one by one, or?
Thanks, Donald,
sure.
for this wonderful presentation. Absolutely eye-opening historical journey through southern Italy. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. When I do these cruise talks, you know, they call me an enrichment speaker. First, let me say, I'm a retired CPA. I'm not a professional historian, right? But I studied a lot of history. I do have a degree in history. I even have some graduate classes in history. So it's an area I love. And my goal, at least on the cruises, is to give people background for the areas that we visit, so they know something about it when we go there. But thank you very much for your nice comments. So let's see.
There was a question by Judy Clayman in the chat.
Okay.
Are there any history books describing the history you related tonight in more detail than you would recommend?
Oh, wow. There's so many books on history of Italy and history of Southern Italy. There's one, it's in the other room, so I hate to leave the screen to go and grab it, but it's on Sicily. I mean, if somebody wants to send me contact information, I'll be happy to send them some recommendations. But there's so many out there that, you know, it's just hard to, like, where do you start? Let's see here. What some of these questions.
Most of them are actually, they are just messages congratulating you for the beautiful presentation. That was one of the best presentation by Sam. And then, grazie, sembra di essere tornato al liceo. It's like going back to high school for just a bit of history.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Dawn? You know, it would be helpful, Dawn, if you could point to 2 or 3 books and we can send it out. Joyce can send out that in an email to the members.
Okay, yeah, I would. I'd be happy to do that. Anyhow,
Yeah.
I don't want to repeat myself here, but I think the fascinating thing about Southern Italy is that people have had to adapt over the centuries to all these foreign rulers. It's one more foreign ruler.
True.
And I think that, like I said, if you go to Sicily in particular, you'll see Greek-style buildings, you'll see Arabic-style buildings. You know, just the diversity is really amazing.
Yeah, that's right. We had a friend in Toronto when I was at the University of Toronto that was classics professor, and he always used to say, if you want to see the best Greek buildings, you can go to the Parthenon, but after that, go to Sicily.
Yeah,
that's what he used to say.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. That's definitely the case.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Oh, and, our pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Don.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll have you back sometime.
Well, I've got lots of talks I give on these cruises.
Good.
Of Venice and Florence and and all sorts of things. But anyhow, thank you.